the amount of people in comments and things on my YouTube channel that have said, you're talking more about charismatic than you are evangelicals. And
right. Okay.
is really interesting that they're missing the importance of the culture that was established by Soul Survivor.
Right.
That's what I'm sort of trying to, a lot of people call it deconstruct, but that's what I'm trying to look at the moment. So from your perspective, what lessons do we need to learn from Soul Survivor? Is there actually any value in it? Or is it just a cult without the sex?
So
that's where I've got to. So I started off making these videos saying, is everything but a cult? I think it is everything. It was a cult, and that's why no one's willing to speak about it. You look at all the different aspects of the people that don't want to speak, the people that do want to speak, how they speak, how people respond to them speaking.
Right.
It's very reflective of...
In what sense do you see it as a cult, Sam?
I think the way that people that were both complicit and pushed around by it, and they don't want to speak out about it, is incredibly insightful, which is really common of most cults.
Yeah.
It was a cult of personality. Pilavachi was this kind of lovable rogue who couldn't harm anyone, and he surrounded himself with younger people who wouldn't challenge him.
Yeah.
He surrounded himself with people that were far more gifted than he was to set a tone. And that's just as an organisation. In terms of then the way that the church services or whatever they were referred to, whether at festivals or in Watford, where I was part for a little while, he would create an emotional first experience using music to then encourage people to be vulnerable, overly so.
Yeah.
That then created a level of power that was unreasonable.
Yeah.
It took away people's agency and they became dependent. So for me, that's all quite cult-like. That thank God there wasn't the sex, there wasn't the huge abuse that takes place in what we would commonly call a cult.
Yeah.
But so then back, and then my last conclusion on it was, if it is a cult and the Church of England didn't recognise their value in it, then it's a cult. If the Church of England do see their value in it, then they've encouraged a cult.
So you raised a number of things for me. And the first one that I want to address, I suppose, is when I brought my motion to Synod in relation to Soul Survivor, certainly the lead bishop on safeguarding sort of came back saying that I was coming from a very sectarian place as a liberal Catholic
and Northern Irish
and being critical of Soul Survivor. I mean, first of all, I'm not just interested in abuse and calling out abuse when it only happens in particular contexts, in charismatic evangelical contexts. In this particular case, I brought my motion to Synod mainly because, having talked to some of the victims and survivors of Mike Pilavachi's abuse, I think there are particular issues in relation to that presenting problem, which actually became the big news story of last year and the year before, when that was revealed, that were really important to look at. And there are a number of issues around that for me. In the end, abuse in any context, whether that's charismatic, evangelical, Catholic, whether it's in the church or outside the church, is to do with the abuse of power. And the way in which power is constructed, I think, is different within each culture. So one of the things that I wanted with my motion was, first of all, that actually, because Soul Survivor had commissioned the scolding report without really talking to the victims and survivors, most of them felt that the terms of reference and the scope was not enough. So that's why
it wasn't grounded in reality.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I mean, you were having a report which was being commissioned by the abusing party. So who's going to trust the results of that? Thirdly, a number of people had contacted me who had been victims of Mike's behaviour, who said that they found it very, very difficult to access scolding. So these were the presenting reasons why I brought it.
Yeah.
But the wider cultural issues for the Church of England, I think, are really important, because Soul Survivor was seen to be probably the most significant success story of the last 20 years, along with places like Holy Trinity Brompton and church planting.
And those two are interlinked.
And they are very much interlinked. I mean, as we
certainly
know,
now.
Yeah. And as we know, Nicky Gumbel is on video saying that all of his curates said that Soul Survivor was the most significant thing in their life. I think what you have at Soul Survivor is you have a church that was planted from St Andrew's Chorley Wood. You have a lay person who then is fast-tracked to being ordained. There are questions for me that need to be unpacked about the governance issues, about how someone which is a church plant, which has, essentially a lot of money, more money than the diocese, relates to the diocese and the bishop, which is meant to have oversight of it. Those are questions which actually we need to relate to the larger church networks at present, because, when a church network like, say, HTB has a larger legal department than the Diocese of London, where does power happen there?
And back to your point in our previous conversation, if you see that context of leadership rather than service, leadership trumps if you've got a decent following, right?
Absolutely. And also, I think the particular issue in relation to Soul Survivor is we are in a church which statistically is in numerical decline and continues to be in numerical decline.
Yeah.
So you have a success story. So the success story is sold as, oh, look, this is a revival in this particular area. And if we become
of young people, which is the coolest anyway, right?
Absolutely. And if we become like this, then numbers will increase.
Yeah.
And if we could become like this all over, then it could be an enormous revival. Well, that's nonsense. Because as we've seen, what happened there is that because it was seen to be a success, there was a lack of governance, a lack of people within the leadership of Soul Survivor who were willing to listen to those who came initially to raise questions about Mike's behaviour, and a lack of that within the diocese, a lack of that within the church at large.
Yeah.
And of course, Mike was very, very well connected with a lot of very important people in the church.
Yeah.
So there is the sense in which, what is success? What does success look like? Success doesn't look like growth in numbers, although growth in numbers may be part of it. Success, in terms of Christian faith, is looking more like Jesus Christ.
Quite. And interestingly, you said about he was very well connected. Again, it's about the connections. A number of people that did the internships, that had leadership positions, father was generally a bishop.
Yeah.
And that was kind of uniform through the thing. I mean, it's just quite bizarre in that respect.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that as well is, from some of the stories that I've been told and also read about, it's this sense in which, lots of young people make a lot of sacrifices in terms of thinking about their own future, but in terms of being sold a sort of international ministry of accompanying Mike all over the world. Well, but, when Jesus calls his disciples, he doesn't say, oh, we're going to go to Australia and then to the States next week.
That's
there's
right.
a sense in which...
Get your skis.
There's a sense for me in which, how is that consonant with the gospel?
Yeah.
How is that consonant with, this man who we believe is God from... who Christians recognise as God and see as the embodiment of God from, a backwater called Nazareth who, goes to Jerusalem and is crucified. And that's it. It is a disjunction.
Yeah, there is.
It's a disjunction which I think is a part and parcel of how the Anglican tradition of what it is to be church has been more and more and increasingly influenced by charismatic evangelical conceptions of what it is to be church, which are imported from North America.
Yeah.
And I think I think at this point we need to raise questions about that, about we need to assess quite carefully what are the what are the positives, what are the negatives about that mega church planting tradition?
The big, what's the word, thing everyone was talking about ahead of safeguarding and people saying I've been abused was sexuality and homosexuality.
Yeah.
And when all the news was broken in the Telegraph about Pilavachi, it still didn't register to me. I mean, I've got friends that are gay, and I'm not, and I've had friends come out to me, and friends sort of say to me that they're attracted to me. It's not something I'm like massively unaware of at all.
Yeah.
But in the church, back then, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and then more recently still, there's this chambers of silence around.
Yes. So, I mean, first of all, I think when you ask that question of me, I'm very conscious that obviously we're debating living in love and faith, sexuality within the church, and there are lots of different responses on that. And obviously I'm, again, vocal on that issue as well. As is well known, I'm, an advocate for LGBTQIA plus rights, being gay myself, and I believe in equal marriage. But I want to distinguish that from actually what is a possible healthy safeguarding culture, because I think you can actually have a healthy safeguarding culture in relation to sexuality within a conservative environment as well. What you indicated, of course, is that it wasn't discussed or it wasn't acknowledged. I think you have to acknowledge it. And just in the same way as I think you have to acknowledge that the reasons why we come into ministry are very, very complex. Yeah, we believe that God has called us, but yeah, we want to be upfront. There's a bit of narcissism in all of us. I think you have to...
Narcissism's pretty negative. You said it twice now.
I think we are. I think we
You
are.
think it's narcissism?
Yeah, I think it is. But anyway, let me stay on the sexuality stuff because you'll get me off it.
Yeah, I'd call it budgie, but anyway.
So we'll stay on the sexuality stuff because I think... I think when desires are unacknowledged or publicly unacknowledged, that is a real difficulty. I think when we lie about ourselves or when we lie about what takes place in our lives that we, obviously there is some distinction between public and private, but in ministry, when we're not being public about it, there is a problem there. And I think it's actually the case within the church that right across the church, we all lie about sexuality.
Yeah.
I'm obviously much more vocal and want stuff to be public, but actually all of us are in a place in which being part of this church compromises sort of what we're like. And I think we've learned as a church to lie about sexuality, and then lie becomes the default situation.
Yeah.
So
it's like Christmas dinner when you've got a feud in the family. But you don't mention it because you're having Christmas dinner.
Yes. Or, in that generation as well, Uncle Mike didn't ever marry. We just he never met the right woman.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think we need to be in a church that is just more honest about sexual desire and what we feel.
Because the rest of the world is.
And because unless you're honest about it in the first place, then you cannot actually set the right boundaries in relation to that, whether that's a conservative boundary, which says you can never actually physically express that love and never get married, or whether in my own case, in my own advocacy, thinking that actually a sexual expression of homoerotic desire is not problematic, and that equal marriage is important. So actually, it was one of the aspects of the motion that I brought, that we needed to look at the construction of sexuality within that context, because unless it's acknowledged, then that's when problems happen.
Great.
Is that it?
Yeah, done. Wrapped.
There we go.
Thank you.
Right. So shall we go to the pub then?
Yeah, let's.
What I will do,
Have you got time as well?
yeah.